This story happened to me and my best friend Jeff when we were back in the 3rd grade, and for the record, I'd like to state that we had no knowledge of the backrooms and didn't know anything about liminal spaces when this happened. Regardless, what happened was strange and surreal, and to this day I don't have a complete explanation for it. For context, there was a mall not too far from where we lived, and Jeff's mom would take me and Jeff there sometimes. Jeff and I had known each other since pre-K, I think, and since we lived in the same neighborhood, we'd hung out quite a bit. I don't think Jeff's mom worked outside the house, so she'd take care of Jeff and his little sister Nancy. This was during the summer, and I think Nancy was visiting one of her friends' house, so Jeff and I were hanging out at his house playing his PS2. Jeff's mom told us she needed to pick out some clothes at the mall, so Jeff needed to come with her and I could either come with them or go back home. I decided to come, since we had fun running around and exploring. When we got to the mall, Jeff's mom parked and we walked inside. I'm not sure if this mall ever closed down, but when we went there, about a quarter of the stores had either left or gone out of business. That included one of the anchors, which I'm pretty sure used to be a Sears. There were still other anchors, including JCPenney's, Dillard's, and another one I can't remember the name of. We came in at the entrance close to where the Sears had been, so Jeff's mom had to go elsewhere. There was also a small play area where we were, and Jeff's mom gave us the okay to hang out there, but told us she'd be back in 10 minutes, and to get her in JCPenney's if anything happened. There wasn't much to this play area, but it did have a little slide and a seesaw-like thing that entertained us for a few minutes. But just then, Jeff stopped and looked over his shoulder. He pointed to the plywood wall that had been used to cover up the entrance to the Sears. It looked like there was a little plywood door in there that had been left open. Jeff and I immediately started grinning and ran over to it. We peeked inside and saw the lights inside were on, though everything had been removed. We looked around us, and as we come in the middle of a weekday, there were very few people in the mall. No one was even by the little play area. Therefore, Jeff and I snuck in, planning to only be there for a few minutes so Jeff's mom wouldn't find out. I remember the inside of the store had a drab yellow and tan color scheme, with tiled walkways cutting through larger carpeted areas. There were fluorescent lights, but there didn't appear to be any water damage, and it didn't smell moldy, just kind of like carpet, I guess. There was a large open area with those pillars with mirrors on them, and then a wall that appeared to separate a back section. Jeff and I ran around the pillars for a bit, before walking towards the back of the store. But just as we were about to get there, Jeff stopped and shushed me. At first I thought he was just joking, but when we fell silent, I could hear a noise. Right off the bat, it didn't sound like anything you might expect to hear there. Instead, it sounded like someone making a croaking noise by exhaling slowly through their throat, and had tiny breaks where maybe that person was taking a breath. We both freaked out a bit, and I don't think either of us wanted to seem like the wimp. Therefore, we quietly walked in closer, though in hindsight, all the talking and running around we did would surely have given away our location. We approached one of the corners of the wall, and could see that it led to a similarly large area on the other side. I almost jumped when I saw what looked to be a figure standing at the far end of the store. Jeff saw it too, and we almost ran away then and there. But it didn't appear to be moving. We couldn't tell immediately if it was a mannequin or a person. I'm still not sure how I summoned the courage, but I tiptoed closer to it while Jeff waited back by the wall in the middle of the store. When I was about 20 feet away, I froze. I noticed the figure moving ever so slightly, meaning it was a person, and they were wearing a plaid shirt and blue jeans. They were just looking up at the ceiling. I'm not sure if they saw me or not, but I turned and ran and Jeff ran with me. We made it back to the plywood wall and closed the door behind us, trying not to make it obvious that we had snuck back there. Luckily, there was still no one by the play area, and we just walked back over there, our hearts still pounding. I remember we hid behind the little wooden wall that encircled most of the play area, our eyes glued to the plywood door, fully expecting whoever that was to pop out at us. A minute passed, and they didn't pop out, and since Jeff's mom hadn't come to get us yet, we decided to go to the JCPenney's. When we got there, we saw Jeff's mom was about to check out. She asked us if something was wrong, and after Jeff and I looked at each other, Jeff just said no. His mom didn't question us after that. The rest of the trip was uneventful, including getting lunch at the food court and visiting a few other stores. When we did have to walk back out by that same entrance, I could feel my heart rate quicken. Like before, our eyes were glued to that door, but that person still didn't come out. Jeff and I continued to go to that mall intermittently, but we never had the balls to go back through that door. Both Jeff and I moved away to different areas before high school, and I haven't been back there since. Therefore, that encounter in the door ended up being just a strange childhood memory. Looking back, I assume that person just had mental issues, but why they chose to stand there is beyond me. I'm just glad that whoever that was didn't come after me or Jeff and possibly abduct us. When I was a kid, me and my two best friends Mark and Jeremy used to hang out at this park, kind of near our neighborhood. I think the park belonged to the city, and it was pretty massive. I remember there was a huge multi-level playscape in the shape of a castle or something, with a slide leading out from the upper level. This park also had a lake, and to get there from the playscape area, we had to cross this huge field. I'm not even sure if it was used for any sports, as it didn't have lines on it or anything, and it didn't appear to be mowed often. Maybe it was supposed to be a wildlife refuge or something, I have no idea. Anyway, this one day we were at the park, and after climbing on the playscape and exploring the water spray area, which wasn't turned on at the moment, the three of us decided to visit the lake. Why exactly, I can't remember. We started walking there, which would actually take around 10 minutes. I think this was around 4 on a Saturday, and there was a strong, cool breeze. The sky was overcast and looked like it could rain, which for some reason made the experience more fun for us. When we were about 2/3 the way through the field, Jeremy noticed something. There appeared to be a small black object 50 feet away, and when we walked over to it, we saw it was a gun. Now I know there's that whole argument about how playing violent video games could desensitize kids, but in that moment we each kind of freaked out and none of us knew what to do. I remember us just standing in a circle a few feet away, looking at the gun and each other as the wind was blowing. We didn't actually have to decide what to do, because a moment later we heard what sounded like a scream in the distance. We snapped our heads to the direction the sound came from, and we saw two men, one waving to the other. Maybe it was just the situation, but Mark and Jeremy and I started to panic and took off running back the way we came. To my horror, when I checked behind us, those two men were running towards us. They were too far away to make out their features, but as they looked like adults, I somehow knew they'd be faster than us. I screamed, and Jeremy and Mark looked back too. We were sprinting now, but this field was so huge we weren't out of it yet. Soon we were completely out of breath and had to slow down a little bit, but those men were still chasing us. One of them yelled at the other one again, but we couldn't make out what they were saying. Finally, we were almost to the edge of the field, the edge that had the playscape by it, and luckily there were other people there. We dashed forward, and when we reached it, we basically collapsed on the wood chips. When we looked back, we saw that the two men had stopped about 50 feet away. We could make out their features now. I'd say they were both in their 20s, and they were wearing hoodies and sweatpants. One of the hoodies was all black, but the other had some kind of design on it, and one of the guys had tattoos on his face. And they were just staring at us. I'm not sure if anyone else at the playground noticed what was going on, but after we caught our breaths, Mark, Jeremy, and I walked further into the playground. After a moment or two, those men turned around and started walking back into the field. I'm not sure if they went back to get the gun, or even if they were the ones who had left it, and if so, why, but we didn't stick around to find out. Luckily, our neighborhood was in the opposite direction, out of view of where those men were walking. We jogged the way home, and when we got to my and Jeremy's street, Mark left us to go to his house, and then Jeremy and I parted ways. Before leaving, we agreed not to say anything, which in hindsight was probably a stupid decision. For all we knew, those men might have figured out where we lived, or come after someone else. I'm reasonably sure they were connected with the gun lying on the ground, but what their plans were, I still don't know. Either way, I'm just glad that we all made it out unharmed. My senior year in high school, our town had been building a new, more modern library, and as I was a big book nerd and chronic overachiever, I was helping with moving everything from the old library into the new one. Most of the books were being ferried over in U-Hauls the town had rented, so there was a lot of loading and unloading. It was actually pretty mindless, but something happened during the process that made me fear for my life. I'd head to the new library around 5 or so on the days I went over. I'd usually help move books for an hour or two before heading home to eat dinner. This was during the winter, meaning that it would be dark by the time I left. I'd get there by riding my bike, and it was about a 20-minute ride each way. On the particular evening in question, I rode my bike and parked it in the bike rack as I normally did. I didn't actually lock it because we were in the middle of this natural area and there wouldn't be any other people nearby. I walked into the main foyer area where the new librarian would sometimes be working. For this story, I'll call her Mrs. C. She wasn't there when I walked in, but that wasn't unusual, as a lot of the time she'd be helping put books on the shelves. The front doors weren't locked while she was there, so I didn't need to unlock or lock anything. This library had a few different sections, including a kids section which had a small playscape and was in its own room. There was also a young adult section in a somewhat separate area. But where I would be working this evening was the main room. Overall, I'd say it was a little bigger than a tennis court, and one side were stairs leading up to a mezzanine with computers. We'd only just started putting books in this section, so aside from the shelves, this whole area was empty. Personally, I thought it looked kind of eerie, but knowing Mrs. C was somewhere in the building made me feel okay. Most of the books had been stacked in large plastic containers, and Mrs. C would put color-coded sticky notes on each container and the corresponding section of the shelves. The books had been put in the containers in order, so there really wasn't much to moving them onto the shelves. I went ahead and got one of the containers from where they were stacked at one corner of the room, and then pushed it across the floor to where I needed to shelve the books. There really isn't much to say about this part, and I probably did this for around 30 minutes before I stopped what I was doing and looked around. I thought I heard a noise. I might have assumed it was Mrs. C, but for some reason I didn't do that. It didn't seem like someone was pushing or carrying something, but rather that they tapped or knocked on something and then stopped. I decided to take a break and investigate whatever was causing that noise, as well as check in with Mrs. C, who I hadn't actually seen up to this point. The noise sounded like it came from a few aisles over, so I walked around some of the shelves, keeping my eyes peeled. Nothing seemed out of place, and I couldn't figure out what made that sound. I even looked closer into the shelves, but there weren't even metal brackets or other pieces that could have fallen over. It dawned on me that I could walk up to the mezzanine to get a better view, so that's what I did. I climbed up the stairs and looked out over the room, which allowed me to see between some of the aisles. Still nothing. At this point I was becoming slightly concerned, as it was pitch black outside and I theoretically could have been alone in the library by myself. Or worse, with another person who wasn't supposed to be there. I went back to the front where the main desk and checkout area were, but Mrs. C still wasn't there. Then I realized I needed to make a decision, which honestly freaked me out a bit. I decided to call out for Mrs. C, first in the front section and then as I walked between the rooms. She didn't answer. As I continued walking and calling her name, I began to feel more afraid. She wasn't in any of the other rooms, including the bathrooms or the kids' room. And eventually I came back to the main room I had been stacking books in. This confirmed my suspicion that what I heard hadn't been Mrs. C, and I decided it was time for me to go. I started to walk back towards the front entrance and then stopped in my tracks. There, by the entrance, was a man I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure if he was supposed to be working with the library, but something told me he wasn't. The man looked to be in his 30s with long hair, a bit of a beard, and ripped t-shirt and pants. A second later my heart sank as I saw him turn his head towards me. Immediately he started walking towards me, and he must have seen I was afraid. He tried speaking to me in this very soft voice, telling me he just needed to use the bathroom and asking me where it was. As the library wasn't even open yet, and there'd be no reason for anyone else to be here, I knew he was lying. I considered my options, and told the man that the bathroom was on the other side of the front area with the checkout counter. The man thanked me, but kept walking towards me. I could feel my voice trembling as I asked if he needed anything else. Then the man didn't say anything. The gravity of what was about to happen hit me in the stomach, and I turned and ran. The man started chasing after me. My only hope was to lose him in the rows of shelves, so when I got to the end of one of the aisles, I ran 3 aisles over and started running back. The man must have taken a second or two to look around when he got to the end of the aisle, because I got about a 5-second lead on him. That made all the difference, and I can't tell you the horror I felt as I ran out of the front doors and grabbed my bike. I managed to get on and start riding a moment before that man got to me. I rode straight over to the Kmart nearby, and thank God that man seemed to be on foot and couldn't follow me. I ran inside and found an employee, and she waited with me while I called 911. As I was explaining what happened, it hit me that that man could have gotten to Mrs. C. And even though I checked around the inside of the building, she might still have been nearby. I can't tell you how relieved I was when I saw 2 officers walk inside the store and how they tried to comfort me. I told them that Mrs. C might still be in trouble, and they called for backup right away. The cops managed to find the man fleeing on foot through one of the fields bordering the library, but they couldn't find Mrs. C. However, Mrs. C did answer her phone, and when the cops informed her of what happened, she started to panic. Apparently she didn't realize I was going to come over that day, and though she was there earlier in the afternoon, she'd gone to meet some of her friends for dinner and forgot to lock the front doors. The man had a criminal history including attempted rape and aggravated assault, and he ended up going to jail after the events of this story. Testifying against him was a whole other ordeal, which I won't go into here. The next time I saw Mrs. C, she started crying and apologizing profusely, and I cried too. Understandably, my parents forbid me to go back to the library, at least until it opened, and I had no problem complying with their request. We were fortunate to live in a very peaceful and safe town, and as far as we knew, the man was just passing through. I still think about this experience at least daily, and the sight of that man approaching me and then running through the aisles haunts my dreams. After this happened, I signed up for a self-defense class and started carrying pepper spray, which makes me feel a bit safer. I'd actually recommend doing this to any woman who might find herself alone, or even every woman in general. Thinking back, I'm still not sure if that noise I heard while stacking books was related to the man. However, I think it probably was, and my theory is that the man was just testing the situation to see if I actually was there alone. However, I don't think I'll ever be able to escape the question of what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away from that man.